On behalf of the OOIDA Foundation, we would like to welcome you to this session of OOIDA's Business Education Series of online training. This series is the most comprehensive series of business education that has been designed exclusively for the professional truck driver. There are a lot of drivers who are really good at driving a truck, but struggle to make a living in the industry. With these presentations, we're trying to help the drivers who excel at operating a truck understand how to be a successful business person. This education series is intended to help drivers navigate the business side of the trucking industry by providing an accessible and relevant introduction to the management principles of operating a successful trucking business. We would also like to congratulate the thousands of attendees who have taken part in this series. Your overwhelming response has helped to ensure that these programs will continue into the future. Thank you for joining us again. This program is the second and final part of a two-part series in which we're discussing dealing with the leasing agreement. More specifically, we're going to be looking at the Federal Motor Carrier Regulation 376.12, which deals with the written lease requirements. My name's Tom Gann, and I'm your host for this program. And just as in part one of this series, our discussion is with my two guests, Hough and Tom Weakley, both from OOIDA. These guys both have years of experience dealing with lease agreements, and I'm sure you're going to find that their views are both knowledgeable and insightful. But before we get started, let me remind you that if you've got any questions or comments, you can simply email them to businesseducation@ooida.com, and someone from our staff will get back with you just as soon as possible. Okay, now that we've got all this intro stuff out of the way, let's get back to this program. Okay, we've been talking about compensation and the paperwork that's involved. What the heck is a rated freight bill?
It is more or less the bill or invoice that the carrier bills the customer, broker, shipper, whoever it may be. Where that comes into big play is when you are based on a percentage, you have the right to see that document. So you can verify that you're getting your fair share. You're getting the right percentage of what is due you in the contract. And that's a big importance to see that. If a carrier won't show you that, that's a big red flag.
So if I'm running on a cents per mile, it doesn't make any difference to me what he charges the shipper. But if I'm running on a percent of the bill, it's a huge item.
Especially sometimes you're paid on percentage of the fuel surcharge. I mean, it should be 100%, but we do see less sometimes. But you could also be a percentage of the detention time or those kind of things. So it is a percentage. So you want to see what's due you.
Yeah, I think that is a huge issue when you get paid a percentage of the line haul. And you do have the right to look at that freight bill. And I'll be honest with you, if you question that, they're going to probably look a little bit askance at you, saying, why are you doubting us, and so forth. But an honest carrier shouldn't have any problem with that, because you're looking at your bottom line just like he is, and you want to say, hey, this doesn't seem right to me. Can you show me what that is?
And we're talking about we're getting ready to sign a contract. Now is the time to ask that motor carrier, if I exercise this, do I get to see them? What is the procedures for it? I want to see one now. Those kind of things. If you're already leased to a motor carrier and you've been there for 5 years, you can't say, I want to go see every bill that I've ever hauled. You're not going to see that. You need to spot check whatever. Yeah, you have the right to it, but the carrier's probably not going to deal with that.
Okay, I know another big section that really needs to be paid attention to is the section on chargebacks. So, Kip, let's talk a little bit about those chargebacks.
Well, this is a fairly simple section, but it has the most questions. The requirement says that the lease shall clearly specify all items that may be initially paid for by the authorized carrier but ultimately deducted from the lessor. More or less, every single thing that's a chargeback on your settlement sheet has to be in the contract. If it's not in the contract, they can't charge it.
Unfortunately, that's not what happens a lot of times. they've been charged for things that are not in the contract. You just can't do that legally. That's again, when you get the calls and they say, can they charge me for that? The first thing they're going to ask you, is it in the contract? If they've got in there that they can charge you an administration fee every time you get a settlement and you sign the contract, they can charge you every time.
And let's don't get carried away. Not all chargebacks are bad.
Most of them are legitimate. I mean, most of them that you have coming out of your check are legitimate, and they have a right to do that. Certainly, if you use their services, if you use their maintenance service, if you buy products from them or whatever, and they may be getting a discount.
They may be able to get your insurance cheaper than you can get it.
Certainly usually have a discount for tires and other things that you may want to be putting on your truck. They have a right, obviously, for you to pay them for those items, and it can be a good thing. It just must be spelled out in the lease. So you'll know, again, when you're looking at your bottom line, figuring your cost of operations, you have to know what your costs are.
And when you're reviewing the contract, thinking about leasing onto them, you can't determine are all the chargebacks in this contract because you haven't seen deductions yet. But a red flag is seeing very few chargebacks or none at all in the contract, which we see quite a bit. Just reviewing a lease at the get-go, you cannot tell if all the chargeback that the carrier is ever going to charge you in the future is in this contract today. Later is when you do get your settlement sheet, you do look at the contract and make sure that each chargeback is in. If it's not in there, it is an unauthorized charge.
And so if they do deduct something from your check and it is legitimate and you do think it's okay, you should make sure it gets written in that contract then.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, Tom mentioned just a second ago about deductions for maintenance or maybe even for your insurance and things like that. Do I have to purchase these items through the carrier?
Well, our next section addresses that the lease must specify that you, the lessor, are not required to rent products, equipment, or services from the authorized carrier. So the
lease is supposed to say I don't have to.
Yeah, exactly. And if they say you must use our base plate and we charge it back to you, that's a service that they're offering. You don't have to do that. You can go get your own base plate. The more you get on your own, the better off you are as an independent contractor, because when you do brake ties, you have to go get that anyway, and sometimes you're going to pay double for it. In simple terms, the carrier can require you to have 10 load locks, but what they can't say is, and you have to buy them from our store here. They can say they can put specification on the load locks or whatever, but they can require you to buy things, but they can't require you to buy it through them. One of the things that's a little off than that is from the Qualcomm or the wonderful electronic recorders out there. They can't make you buy them from the carrier, but they can say you have to buy one that fits our system. Well, the only system that works is the one they offer. So kind of a gray area, but that's a decision you want to make before you go lease to them.
In reality, if that contract says you have to purchase your maintenance through their shop, and you come up and say, no, wait a minute, I don't have to, they may not sign you on.
Exactly. And that's,
And that's kind of your choice.
Absolutely. It's a business decision you have to make, but it would be a violation of the regulations, but, doing something about it may be something a little harder.
Okay, I hear a lot about escrow accounts. Am I required to keep something in reserve with the carrier?
No. First, we'll start with what is an escrow. Escrow is any money the carrier's holding on. It's your money that they're holding on to as an escrow. Not always does the carrier call it an escrow. They call it a maintenance fund or a performance bond, or they can call it whatever they want to, as long as it's your money that they're holding on to as an escrow. If they do require an escrow, then the leasing regulations has some specific regulations for escrow. Not all contracts or carriers require an escrow, but if the carrier does, no matter what they call it, they can call it a pink banana for all I care. If it's your money, it's an escrow. The amount of the escrow has to be specified. How much do you have to hold? I've seen contracts that says you'll put in so many cents per mile and never come up with a deadline or an end point. So you're just constantly feeding them money. That's not something you want to get into. They need to be specified on how much money they're going to hold, and they can have several escrow accounts. They can have a performance bond, they can have a general escrow, a maintenance escrow or maintenance account. If they're holding on to money, all those are going to go under these same regulations. Secondly, they have to specify on what the escrow can be used for. If it doesn't say they can be used for maintenance or tires, then it can't be used for maintenance or tires. So of course, we're not all that big a fan of escrows because a lot of carriers use this capital to grow their business. They can hold on to hundreds of thousands of dollars from drivers. Many drivers, I've seen contracts that are like $10,000 escrows. That's way too high to have with a carrier. You don't want to use, if they offer a maintenance account and they offer it to you, don't use them as a savings account. You're a business person, have your own savings account, have a savings account with the bank, whatever, and being able to use that. Don't let the another hold your money. That's never a good thing to be in.
Kip, it would be great if every driver had enough money to where they could have a savings account and they could dip into it when they needed the money. But quite frankly, the reality is a lot of guys, especially guys who are just starting out, just bought their first truck, they don't have that bank of money that they can draw on. So, an escrow account is a necessary way of business for a lot of guys. And with most carriers, it's not an issue. But there are a few carriers out there that maybe don't treat the escrow the way they should. So it's paramount that the drivers understand what happens with this escrow account. One of the things that's always confusing to drivers is how interest is paid on this escrow account. Now, the regulation says that the carrier has to pay interest, but the driver never seems to see any interest return.
While the escrow is being held by the motor carrier, you are entitled to interest. But the regulations knock this down completely. They have to pay on a 13-week, 91-day treasury bill. You could do better anywhere else. The caveat here is the motor carrier can deduct the sum of your average advance over the quarter and add that up, and if it adds up to more than the escrow, they don't owe you interest. So if you use their fuel card, that's an advance. So if they have a $1,000 escrow, and in 3 months' time you use more than $1,000 in fuel money off of their card, they don't owe you any escrow. So almost in general, no interest is going to be paid to this account.
Kip, as a driver, do I have any way of keeping track of what was spent out of my escrow account?
You are entitled to see a copy of any transaction that involves in that escrow. If they put money in, take money out, usually that's going to be on your settlement sheet.
So if you have a maintenance escrow and you use it, they should give you an invoice.
An accounting of that. Anytime there's any kind of transactions in that account, you're entitled to an accounting. They're supposed to give you an accounting. But at any time you want an accounting, you can demand an accounting of that escrow, because it is your money that they're holding on to. Once you do terminate from this carrier and they're holding this escrow, they can keep that for 45 days from the date of termination. That's so they can finish up all the paperwork.
Somebody calls in, they're complaining about an escrow account. The first question is it in your contract?
What does your contract say? That's all you hear in my department. Yeah. We want to look at, is it one of the items that can be used? Is it in the contract? Is it a chargeback item? Is it something you're responsible for? So there's a lot of little back work you have to do.
Okay, we've been talking about these lease agreements quite a bit here, and it can be kind of confusing, especially somebody, let's say me, that I'm new. I'm going to go out and sign my first contract. I've been a company driver, but I'm going to lease onto this motor carrier. It's confusing. Is there any place that I can get help to look over this?
A member of OOIDA always has the compliance department to review the contract, to advise you of what's in it, what's not in it, what stuff we don't like.
What do you mean? How do I go about doing that, Kip?
You just call us up and send it in. First, I want you to read it. I want you to read it yourself before you send it in, so you've got questions and things you don't understand. That's what we're going to talk about. We're just going to sit down with you and talk about the things we like, we don't like. It's a very easy process. It's painless.
And actually, I've walked through your department when people were doing this contract review, and it's kind of almost comical to listen to some of the conversations. But I'll hear one of the people in your department go, okay, now look at line 3 in that second paragraph. Do you know what that's saying?
And you wouldn't believe what some of these contracts says. So, there is no normal contract, general contract. Oh, it's just one of those contracts, the recruiter's going to, it's just one of those normal contracts. I've not seen one of those yet. Send it in, but read it first. We can look at it and tell you what's good, what's not good.
Yeah, I think we hear this a lot also, is that a guy is going through orientation and he's never really seen that contract yet. He's getting ready for his third day. His truck's been set and he's not making any money. And he's, the third day, what you hear in orientation, or the second day is, the last part of our orientation is on this contract. And, there's a lot of legal stuff involved in it. And I'll be glad to go through the whole thing with you if you want to sit here with me. But I know you guys need to get out there and make some money. And all contracts are alike. And the truth is, guys, if you're not making money, we're not making any money. So, we're not going to try to screw over you. So, hey, you can stay here if you want, and I'll be glad to go through it with you. But if you want to get out there and let's get to rolling, let's make some money out there. I got some, we got loads to haul. You just sign right here, and we'll get all the things done.
And I've also got a bridge in Arizona I'd like to sell too.
Well, you'll be surprised how many guys wind up signing it because they are ready to get out there. They want to make that money. And
there's one other point that we really need to make about having OOIDA look over your agreement with you and help you with it. OOIDA does not negotiate that contract for you. They'll make you aware of what's in it. They'll help you understand what's in there. They might make some recommendations on some things you might do or try to do, but quite frankly, they can't negotiate it for you. It's a business decision that you need to make. Okay, now before we run out of time, let's get to Part L of this regulation. Part L deals with copies of the lease. And basically what it says is there needs to be 3 copies of the lease. 1 copy for the leasee, 1 for the leaseor, and another copy needs to be kept in the equipment. Now, it also says that all 3 copies must be signed. When it's talking about signing the lease, they're talking about both parties need to sign all 3 copies of this paperwork. And I know that isn't always the case, and I know a lot of times the lease isn't kept on or in the equipment. But probably the biggest mistake is not getting signed copies of any changes or exclusions or addendums to the lease.
Going along with that, did you read the lease? Do you understand the lease? A lot of times there's a lot of legalese in these things. It's hard to understand. That's what we're here for. We can, assist you in going through and filtering this agreement. Another thing you want to pay attention to are the pages numbered. Are they in sequence? Are any pages missing? Those kind of things we have seen.
What do you mean pages missing?
Where, the compensation page is gone. They'll fill it in later. Well, that's almost signing a blank check. Not a very good idea to do. So you want to make sure you have the full entire contract. One thing I see a lot is the contract, the body itself will say, see Appendix A or see Appendix C. But I don't have Appendix C. So you make sure you have the full contract. If it's talking about it, you want to make sure you have it in front of you. So you're making the business decision that you need to do.
Kip, while you're talking about missing pages, my understanding is it's always a good idea to, even if when you get the contract, the pages aren't numbered, for you to go ahead and put your own numbers on those pages.
You number them and you initial each page, so that way you know that that's the page that you read and that's one you agreed on.
So no one can replace that page later on.
Yeah, little mix match there. Not saying that happens, but and make sure that you sign everywhere if you agree to it, and the carrier signs to it. Both parties need to sign this agreement. Any addendum, any changes to this contract, even after you sign it and you're leasing onto this motor carrier and you've ran for 6 months and they want to change something. They want you to have an addendum. That addendum does not go into play until you and they sign it.
Uh-oh, it sounds like we're completely out of time in this segment. Let me remind you that this is part 2 of a 2-part series in which I've been talking with Kip Hough and Tom Weakley, both from OOIDA, and we've just concluded our conversation on leasing regulations. If you're thinking about leasing onto a motor carrier and you'd like some help deciphering the regulations, give the staff at OOIDA a call. There are no risks and there are no obligations, just friendly people wanting to see you succeed. Also, if you've got any questions about the information in today's program, or if you'd simply like a certificate of completion for this program, just drop us an email. That email address is businesseducation@ooida.com. Someone from our staff will get back with you just as soon as possible. And while you're thinking about it, you might as well join, rejoin, or extend your membership with the OOIDA. Remember, OOIDA is the only association that's been fighting for the rights of all professional truck drivers since 1973. To join us in this fight, simply give us a call at 1-800-444-5791.